Hello, I hope that you are all very well today. My name is Ariel Sanchez. I am a PhD researcher in political science at the Institute for European Studies at the VUB. First, I would like to thank Silvio Piros for his invitation to participate in this class that is called History and Theories of European Integration. Today, I will be sharing some insights of my fieldwork. As you know, Silvio is the program coordinator of the postgraduate course in European policy, and with Alexandra Mihai forms the crucial research team of the well-known Educational Development Unit, or EDU. The EDU is involved in a wide range of activities in the areas of teaching, training, e-learning, blended learning, and research. Today, I will focus on the current challenges that the EU project is facing with regards the growing and contrasting regional tensions that affect both the EU and Britain, particularly in the aftermath of Brexit. The current uneasy context of Northern Ireland that seems to be a political and discursive returning point in the EU-British dispute. As you can see, the title of the lecture is The EU and Regionalism, Rethinking Historical Unions Since the Scottish and Catalonia referenda, Brexit and the ongoing political equation of Northern Ireland. The cases are relevant to the remaking of history and regional identities that are not really going in the same direction than reduced unions such as Britain and Spain. By reduced unions, I mean if they are compared to larger units of global identities and overreaching ideologies such as the EU that refers more to supranational state identities, or perhaps even larger than the EU normative such as the United Nations and the rule of law. Whatever that may mean, we are usually looking at the moment at something that is more emotional, to put it in context. Particularly if we are looking at Catalonia, the issue with the Spanish state resolution in the aftermath of the Catalonia referendum, or the tension that Scotland is having with the British status quo. These kind of areas are gaining more emotional grounds than rational ones. To put the context in analytical frame, no? Of course, there is not gap of doubt that there is a well-established EU citizenship. With the current regional tensions, one wonders what is really happening. And this calls for the review of the EU integration to critically consider what went wrong, at least since we don't really know what is going to be the future of the EU project. So far, we know that we have more than half century, perhaps, of this European integration. However, before exploring the mentioning cases as separate units, and before drawing brief cross-comparative views, let me tell you a little bit of my background. I moved from Argentina to England in 2004 and to Scotland in 2013. As I pointed before, I am a PhD researcher at the Institute for European Studies. I did my master in international relations and International Politics at the University of Manchester in England, and I did my undergraduate studies in crime, deviance, society and sociology at Staffordshire University, also in England. Catalonia and Northern Ireland are part of my current research interest. In relation to Scotland, well, Brexit and the Scottish referendum are part of my daily life, basically because I moved to Scotland in 2013. I gathered an overall of 1,500 survey interviews during the Scottish referendum in 2014. I heard the news of the former Scottish Prime Minister Alex Salmond when he said in BBC Radio 4 that the Scottish Parliament decided to call for a referendum. At the time I was living in England. Ironically, then I moved to Scotland and I actually worked in the area. I followed closely the Brexit phenomenon. I sent to Argentina a very short sociological and political analysis regarding the assassination of Joe Cox, the then UK Labour Party Member of Parliament, and that report captured the Argentinian media attention. I ended up participating in a national live news channel known as Todo Noticias that was back in June 2015. I am a political activist. I am a member of the Yes Scotland campaign. I am also involved in some SNP meetings. I interviewed several people from the Yes Scotland campaign and also from the SNP. And I also interviewed key protagonists in this area. For example, Alan Knight, that is the director of the documentary London Calling, BBC bias during the Scottish referendum, and translated that to Spanish. I will be sharing a link later on. I was doing fieldwork in Northern Ireland in the last British general elections. I actually didn't sleep that night, and it was a very interesting outcome, very similar to what happened during the Brexit referendum. That usually when you look at what is happening usually with the pollings, we know that the data gathered when you do survey don't match easily what is going to be the outcome. That happened in the UK since Cameron won the elections here in the UK. So we cannot really trust the role of market or social research institution doing surveys, because we know that the results are usually irrelevant. There is a rationale of discourse in using these kind of institutions, particularly in the UK. As I pointed before, I was in Northern Ireland. I remained in close contact with academics based in Catalonia. That was before the Catalonian referendum. I've been in contact with them and visiting Catalonia often, far before they did the Catalonian referendum. So the results of the referendum and what they experienced there, that was really sad, particularly when you have friends there and you get messages from WhatsApp or pictures, and it's not the same than following Twitter or Facebook. It's different when people that you really know or that you work with or perhaps former teachers are actually facing this very rare situation, no? So in that way affected me quite directly. We know that these kind of problematic Brexit, Scottish referendum, Catalonian referendum are kind of serious political fractures. In that ground, I prefer to consider the application of the fieldwork and what is happening in the neighborhoods, what people say about the current political status of the EU in Scotland, in working class areas or blue collar areas, to say something, particularly in the man worker context. The views of the EU are not very well known. That is pretty much linked to the British status quo and the quite serious mismanagement of control or bias of the media, particularly if you're looking at tabloid papers, or if you're looking at BBC, then you can quickly gather that it's just a propaganda machine. No? We don't adapt it. So I am looking at this area from different angles, initially from the fieldwork, from the campaigning or political activism, and also from the other side. I've been spending some time with people that actually disagree with the Scottish referendum or with the Catalan referendum. So I tried as much as I could to avoid bias, but we know that bias is pretty much unavoidable. No? That's my background. I am an Argentinian living in Scotland. I'm also a PhD student at the University of Brussels, and I am in very close contact, or I did some field work also in Catalonia. That's my background. Since you are already more than conversant about the details of the EU, I wouldn't expand too much in this area, but briefly we know that it's a unique economic and political union of 28 members, in theory soon to be 27. We are looking at an overall of 510 million people. We know that the idea behind the creation of this European project was the economic cooperation. Then we know the role of the European Monetary Union, this idea of having a shared currency or euro, and behind that idea 19 countries. The normative underneath of the policy making practices of the EU are related to the rule of law. There we have ongoing treaties and representative democracy. European Parliament that refer to the representation of citizens, the European Commission and the European Council that refers to member states representation. At this stage we need to specify one very important point when we are looking at policy making criteria. Behind this idea is the rule of law in practice. The rule of law refers to supranational discursive forms that are the core of globalization. In practice, this refers to powerful states that are exempt of the supranational normative that apply to the rest powerless states. This particularity is very important to consider when we look at policy and what is the role of policy making and what is the idea behind that and how relevant that would be to actually the people that would be experiencing that policy changes. If you look at the UK and the discourses from the Conservative Party during the Brexit campaign, this way of democratic practices by the EU was distorted. The message here was that it was too much paperwork, too much bureaucracy, too many hazards to reinforce economic relationships. That was the main argument by the Brexiters or people in support of Brexit. We know that in practice it means that democracy for conservatives was the problem. Democracy tends to be a problematic thing. If you look at what they are doing now, yeah, democracy may be a hazard. Here in the UK, we are having quite serious problem with basic human rights practices, particularly that is affecting the daily life context of Europeans. Until recently, we know that now Theresa May, in theory, is promising the security of EU nationals, but in practice the story is different. We are having a quite serious issue of discrimination against Europeans, not only in job applications but also in the service area, in the health area, the way that police is targeting immigrants, the growing of illegal way of detentions. For the British view is not illegal because they refer to that to the immigration detention center, and from immigration detention center to illegal detention center is not much the difference in practice. And in short, we can say that these democratic practices by the EU and the way that the decision making is worked out is a particular problem to the UK because it has to be democratic oriented, in short. So they voted to leave. Here we are looking at the larger scope of what they mean by leaving on the 23rd of June of 2016. As you all know, the majority of the UK voters decided to leave the EU. But by majority, then we reach this problematic, particularly when you are looking at the media. Usually, if they refer to leave the UK, the conservative media would refer to a country. The country decides to leave. But if you look at the split in the votes, of course 52% decided to leave against a 48% of remaining, but that refers to 4 countries. It does not refer to just one country that decided to leave. And that's very problematic because when you look at the discourses of the media, usually when they defend the posture of leaving, it means being nationalist and do the right thing for the country. However, Scotland is a country, and Northern Ireland is a northern area of what we could say is another country that actually belongs to the southern part historically, but for whatever reason, historically we say that at the moment is part of the UK. Many were actually linked to the UK, very typical posture of an empire or the idea of being an empire. When you look at it closely, then you will see that Northern Ireland and Scotland basically didn't both leave. Anyway, Theresa May triggered the Article 50 on the 29th of March 2017. On the 18th of April, she calls for a general election for the 8th of June 2017, ended up in a massive embarrassment for the Tory party. Tory, by Tory we mean Conservatives. The constitutional questions of devolution and separation in Scotland and Wales and reunification in the Northern Ireland are the main debates and returning point. It is important to note that the referendum was consultative, non-binding. In practice, it became one of the most ill-informed in the UK history. When you look at the campaigns from the Conservatives, an image that I didn't put in this lecture, but I think it was over-quoted, a buzz saying on the side, rather than giving money to the EU, we could invest that money into the NHS, that is the National Health Service. When you look at it, the promise of 350 million euros to put back in the NHS, then we look at the problematic, because now we are looking at
at the reality that the UK will need to pay actually 35 billion euros to the EU. And that it relates to common agreements and shared projects and the responsibility of paying the cost of these projects. No, it gets our attention that the referendum was a call for asking to British people what they think would be the right way to take. And if you are thinking now in a similar context back to the Greek crisis, when Tsipras called for a referendum to actually ask that actually was asking the Greek citizens if they actually should stay in the EU or avoid to pay, and they had a massive support to actually reject the agreement that the EU was proposing to Greece. And yet the Tsipras government did not consider the result of the referendum as the right way to go. And that's another contrasting event. So each time that we look at this kind of referendum, we are looking at, okay, this is not, it cannot be a parliamentary outcome, it cannot be a law. So slowly you would see that this aim of wording started changing, and it became a lot more aggressive. The empire nostalgic started showing in. We are British anyway. We used to be an empire. We remain a very powerful economy. We are so important, and they started filling up themselves with this idea in the media, particularly when you are looking at the profile of who control the media. Then you are looking at usually an elder group of politicians, of elites, usually white. For them, there is a proud in the British history, but of course, if you look at the Industrial Revolution, slavery, exploitation, what's happening with India, Africa, and all around, then you are looking at what actually produced this very powerful economy, and actually it was the outcome of exploiting everybody else. Therefore, then you have currently this context of we are so important, we are British at the end of the day, and it seems like they believe that the EU would do whatever they wanted, and of course they got the picture completely wrong. No? Thereafter the Brexit, we reach the post-truth politics context, a debate framed by appeals to emotions and personal beliefs. Facts are of secondary importance. We look at people talking about things that are or were completely disconnected from policies. They were not falsifying the truth, but truth gaining the secondary importance. Definitely they used cherry-picking facts and came to conclusions you desire. I believe, therefore I am right. Beliefs played the primary role. It was mainly emotional, a lot attachment to the British Empire importance. Then we look at post-truth, that became the word of the year due to prevalence in Brexit referendum election. We need to connect that with the Trump campaign. In the UK, you suddenly find Michael Gove, Brexit campaigner, saying, "We have had enough of experts." That was a hilarious expression. The idea was to exclude professionals from the campaigns. We are looking at a country that's supposed to be very proud of its education, the British education, suddenly rejecting the advice of political analysts, sociologists, historians, economists. Every single report was rejected. The idea was we want Brexit no matter what. And if you happen to disagree from the academia, you were alone. Basically, if you look at the voting behavior, we cannot say that there is a relationship between lower education groups, because actually people very much educated actually support that for whatever reason. That's the beauty of democracy. But we can establish that the use of the media, the use of the discourses that were dominant, targeted specific groups, we can see that the places that were linked to academics or political analysts did not gain support. They were overwhelmed. They were having just too many fronts to deal with. The academia didn't have any chance to do anything about it. It was just too much money into the campaign to leave. And this is the context that we still have today, and the impact was not really unknown. But what we know is the impact that we observed a few months after that. Moving on, we can continue looking at the context since Brexit. And it's always yes, but no, but yes, Brexit no, Brexit what? As far as we are concerned, we have something more substantial, that is the report from the negotiators of the EU and the UK government. And they call it Progress on Phase 1. You have the link there in the sliding at the bottom. Perhaps you would be interested in reading the original and slowly look at how we make policies, what is the role of history there, and what are the positions from both parties. On the one hand, we have the EU as a representative of several countries. In this case, it's going to be about 27. On the other hand, we have the UK that, according to the voice of Theresa May, represents one country, but as we pointed before, we are looking at 4 countries, and it's just too much rejection of the final outcome by Scotland and Northern Ireland. No? We can see that both parties have reached agreement in principle across the following 3 areas, and slowly, besides the detail that you can read in full in the report, we are looking at particular three points. Citizens' rights. What is going to happen with EU citizens in Britain? What would happen with the British citizens in the EU? The other issue would be what is going to happen with the Good Friday Agreement. Is the Belfast Agreement, signed on the 10th of April of 1998 by the United Kingdom government, the Irish government and the other participants in multi-party negotiations, must be protected in all its parts. This extends to the practical application of the 1998 agreement on the island of Ireland and the totality of the relationship set out on the agreement. That's going to be very problematic because there is not easy context in Northern Ireland regarding that. We have a very recent alliance between the DUP and Theresa May that already has placed in the context out of balance of power. We have an ongoing crisis because Sinn Féin still not resolving the issue of no sharing now government and very likely to get again direct rule in Northern Ireland. So we are having a constant step back within the UK. And the issue of Northern Ireland differs from Scotland because Scotland is not having a very recent history of violence, whereas when you look at Northern Ireland, when you are looking at one of the more problematic areas of the political memory of Britain, of course the national discourse looks like it's very far in the past, the situation is resolved, we have the Good Friday Agreement. But in reality, we cannot consider that the issue of Northern Ireland has been resolved, even less now. Definitely, it is not, it will not. It's very unlikely that we would ever have any historical ground to say that that's not going to happen again. However, if we were to look closely what this joint report from the negotiators of the EU and the UK government means for us empirically, then we need to maybe find a way to quickly explore what this wording tell us empirically. If you are thinking in looking at this area, then I could share with you some empirical insights and maybe a little way to go. Moving on to the empirical context of the joint report of the EU and the UK Of course, we need to consider that what you can see here are just specific words taken out of context. It would not fit the criteria of content analysis, not yet. It does, however, fit the criteria of observational purposes. Initially, we can see in the graph three most cited words. Whatever it is linked to union kicks first, agreement, and withdrawal. So, withdrawing, union, and agreement are the three most cited words. Roughly, when we look at what is in between, we are looking at rights and law, and we are looking at citizens, slowly issues of financial factors start showing in, and this can give us roughly what it is about, the matter of the report. Therefore, we could perhaps explore a little bit further what this visual information could provide us if we were to actually write maybe a report about what we can observe, or if you want to write an essay or something linked to this area, then we can slowly start looking at how we can actually grab further details and make it empirically sound. And as a final review about the same report between the EU and the UK that we were looking in the last slides, this bar chart in 3D refers more to more or less what it could look like if you were to code the data that you are looking or reading in details. If you want to see the thematic nature of the report, then from the left to the side, to the left side, to the right side, you have ongoing themes, and that could give you more a thematic analysis, no, than actually isolated words. As we said before, isolated words wouldn't give you context analysis, reliability, but thematic analysis then give you more straightforward results that can also be used for exploring further, maybe in an essay or a report or a research exercise practice, to see what are the themes that the coded data could lead to. From the left side, you can see accounting, agreement, application. Maybe to the other side, we are looking at withdrawal, we are looking at security, rights we come across. But if you are looking at the more coded data, we are looking at rights. We are looking again residence. And something different shows that is between the north and south, that you can explore that maybe as a different theme, but law is coming back. And again, financial settlement is showing in. But in the coding area, you see that there is a slight inversion of the importance, because financial settlements were not as important as we thought it could be maybe in a text search query. The text search query was linked more to different three main criteria. If you remember, we were looking before a union, we were looking before an agreement and withdrawal. Here, in this case, however, you are looking at that the financial settlement started kicking on. In reality, the issue of who pays what and how much is quite important. That would be more or less the last part of what you can retrieve visually from the same report. Moving on from the last report published by the EU and this agreement between the UK and the EU, we could look a little bit at the main debates. By debates, I mean the main discourses that the Brexiters used during the Brexit campaign. What are the main discourses that we look in the media, and how really bad is immigration for the UK, and what are the resolutions at the policy level. We can say that if we look at the Office for National Statistics, we can grasp briefly what happened since 1991 in the UK. As you can see in the chart, we have three views: British immigration, total EU immigration, and total non-EU immigration. When it comes to the EU immigration, we have a steady line. However, the EU immigration and what we consider as non-EU immigration behave in a contrasting way. The non-EU immigration decreases steadily since 2002 or 3, that it was its peak. On the other hand, EU immigration has a tendency to escalate since 2003. Since 2015, 2016, we see that both started going down. Indeed, the issue with Brexit was more to scare EU immigration than non-EU immigration. The problem here at the discourse level was between Europeans. It was not between the UK as a European country against African, Chinese, or Latin America immigration. The filter here with Brexit is against Europeans. It is a different problematic. When I was in a summer school in Budapest, I remember that I used to ask what academics thought about this process, and what they argue that to understand Brexit we need to look at the last half century of the European Union, particularly since the creation of this kind of common and shared economic model, to say something, on the free market. What seems to happen is that the initial or early post-war period, particularly until 1960s perhaps, there was an issue of reconciliation that remained until 1990s. But since 2000, we can observe in the EU the return of debates that escalate at the discourse level. As I said earlier, the discourses are a lot more aggressive, even though the EU at the public sphere remains maybe more accurate, to say something, maybe not that conflictive verbally, whereas in the case of the UK the attack is straight on. The demonization of the Polish community, of particularly Eastern European countries, and then the demonization of any other European immigrant. That is at the political and the British media level, of course. Then we need to start thinking, okay, if you want to have immigration now, then how you are gonna deal with the change effect of that. So the proposal has been, even before Cameron, how to control immigration, again in the little presence in the British media since Cameron, and with reference to the immigration that was coming from Syria, the border with France. At no point the British politicians would say, in reality, if we keep bombing them, we are going to have more people coming in. And of course, the European Union did not say clearly that. The problem is how to control immigrants, that influx of immigrants escaping from Syria, but not much mention either at the UK level or at the European level, how they are going to stop killing people in Syria. Perhaps if you stop bombing them, then you don't have to deal with that problem, no? I mean, since the killing of Gaddafi, we are only dealing with crisis of immigrants. And one of the main discourses here in the UK is, even though that they are bombing them steadily, they say we need to stay away from the European Union because we are having this problem of massive immigrants influx, and if we stay away, maybe we can control back our borders. It's interesting that discourse. Let's control back our borders, or let's gain independence. We are looking at the former British Empire that actually don't have any record of invasion, to say something. If something, they have more records of invading, but not of being invaded. That the different case was in European mainland in the Second World War period. In Britain, the issue of literal invasion is not recorded. They don't have that experience. So when we look at how they are going to deal with immigration and what they are going to do at the national state level, then the story is very complicated. And this is what we are going to look briefly in the next few slides. The issue with dealing now with a policy that was initially a national inquiry that somehow they managed to put as a law, now raised the executive power above the legislative power, constructed a very particular context for Europeans living in the UK. What I can say is that if you happen to be European thinking about moving to the UK, I would suggest think it again, and once you think that again, then think it again and again. I would strongly suggest to avoid to live in the UK because this is going to be worse. On the left side, you can see roughly an estimation of the workforce breakdown of selected industry sectors in the UK, from food and services, manufacturing, transport and storage, information and communication, financial and insurance activities, retail, construction, scientific and technical activities, agriculture, health and social work, and education. If you look at that area, you are looking at a total of roughly 2 million people, almost. Now, that points that the blue bar, the dark blue actually, is a referent of UK-born people. The yellow one would be EU-born, and the light blue is non-EU-born people. So if you look roughly at food service, and about 20% are non-European, but 15% are European. However you look at it, then you have very briefly an involvement of European workforce from a 5% to maybe a peak of 14% across the industry at the national level. Non-EU born workforce, it goes between 8% and 19% across the workforce service of manufacturing, transport, information, and so on and so forth. Now, what we are looking at that an elite in power that decided to put Brexit because in reality the main problem was, as we were pointing before, the bureaucratic model of the EU. That was the main discourse here. How uncomfortable it is to do business with the EU because they actually have maybe a too democratic model, to say something. What we can say here is that if Brexit means Brexit, we can in fact empirically point at the moment we are dealing with an institutional collapse. You have access there to the main sources if you are interested in exploring this data further. It's all around across several media channels and several websites. The one that is at the alarming one is the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. We found that in the 12 months to June, almost 10,000 doctors nurses and support staff have left, with more believed to have followed in the past 3 months only. We are looking at that about 25% of the current workforce are unsure about what to do since the referendum. That would include also my wife, that work as a EU scholar. That would include my neighbor from the Greek community that works at the NHS. That would include many people that I know from the Polish community that are working actually in the automotive industry. There is not sector in Scotland or the overall UK that is not affected by the so-called Brexit. But if you look at the health service sector again, we are looking at about 60,000 of the 1.2 million NHS workforce linked to EU nationals. More than 10,000 doctors, more than 20,000 nurses and health visitors. In the adult social care, there are 90,000 workers. In practice, we see a decrease sharp of 96% of nursing application jobs. Nurses literally disappear from the UK. I mean, at the job application level. That means that first they drop a policy, a discourse, and then they have to deal with this institutional collapse. At the institutional level, we can empirically point that the UK did not suffer such crisis, even if you put the First and the Second World War together. That's what are the number pointing. Because during the First and the Second World War, you have the discourse of the nationalism and maybe the demonization of Germany during the Second World War, and so on and so forth. But today there is not a war, and yet a complete institutional collapse. According to the Brexiters, it's going to be worse for the EU. The EU would say it's going to be worse for the UK. In reality, it is worse for the people affected, because the policymakers in the EU, the negotiators in the UK are not pretty much the people affected by that. But my wife, my neighbor, and the rest, well, we are all affected, by the way. So this is the problem that we have. 2 different parties negotiating, and in between 3 million Europeans in the side of the UK, 1.2 million, maybe more, British in European mainland, and finding this way of dealing or negotiating with people's future. And social context shows a degraded way of dealing with political negotiations, not only at the UK level, but also at the EU level. Because while the EU is trying to encourage the UK to protect European citizens, also British citizens abroad are already experiencing the problem to keep their jobs, so because of this current political context. At the end of the day, policymakers, the elite-oriented dealing with this is not really affected. The rest of the people, yeah, they are all affected. As I pointed initially, I live in Scotland and I experienced both the Scottish referendum in 2014, but also the Brexit and all the political swings at the discourse level. I would like to share just a sum up of the visit that Alex Almond did at the University of Stirling last February. Besides that, he is a very powerful speaker. He starts scattering some historical relationship between the European Union and Scotland, but the way that he resumes history is unrelated to the UK and the EU. His particular approach referred to looking at history from the perspective of Scottish view, from what means for Scotland be part of the EU. And after that, I would like to share what are the views of the UK as a whole by the former president and foreign minister of international relations of Switzerland, when I was there a few months ago, because actually what Micheline Calmy-Ray pointed is a different story of the UK as a whole, and it takes into account that the UK as such is a very small place to think that can have a very big deal about Brexit or think that can put any pressure in the EU.
Around the country in terms of research funding do not vote Article 50 until our fellow citizens from Europe are guaranteed the rights to which they are entitled as equal members of society. Another fairly reasonable stuff such as that. So every single member of Parliament from Scotland voting for the SNP amendment bar the one single sole Tory. Now, if you ever wanted to see the divergence between the two nations, that vote absolutely illustrates that divergence, that dichotomy, that choice of separate paths. Why did we prioritise the single marketplace? The single marketplace is the European Economic Area. The European Economic Area is the largest free trade area in the world. An area of 600 million people, encompassing not just the European Union, but the EFTA countries, except Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland. That is the European Economic Area. Given the European Economic Area, then you're good. You can set up a production unit of choices, best alcoholic beverages in Stirling, and you can export that without hindrance, without any inhibition, anywhere across. You can sell it to 600 million customers with no inhibition whatsoever. And you can do that for other things as well. Equally important. It's a big, big thing. First time it's happened in that scale in world history. First time it's happened in that geographical extent since the Roman Empire. It's a huge, important thing. And these trading blocks that have developed in the world, not just the European Economic Area, but ASEAN and the Pacific, the American and South American agreement across the Atlantic, these trading blocks are part of the success story of the world economy over the last 50 years. So now more free trade in the world than there ever has been before, and that's been part of the lifting generally of much of humanity out of poverty into prosperity. Much of humanity, of course, remains in poverty, but that stimulus to trade and investment has been part of the success. A few things in economics that are absolutely given. Very, very few things. Most things there's a case for, there's a case against, there's a but, and there's an and, there's an uncertainty. But one thing is absolutely certain. Protectionism costs jobs. It costs jobs for the country that enforces it, it costs jobs in the country that retaliates, it costs jobs for the third countries that retaliate to that. Adam Smith spent a great deal of time demonstrating that in the Wealth of Nations. Donald J. Trump.
However, from the narrative that Salmon is giving us of a historical interest between Scotland and the European Union, when we step away from the UK context and we look at what, for example, Switzerland would think about this dispute between the EU and the UK, the views of the former president and also foreign affairs minister Micheline Calmy-Ray is a little bit different. It portrays both, for example, France and Britain as not influential as they think they are, particularly in international affairs.
Each country wants for itself. It is a question of sovereignty. So if you say, well, Great Britain is going out of the European Union, but say to France, please, you put your nuclear arsenal in the hands of the European Union, and you wouldn't be anymore alone to decide about its use. You can see what President Macron will answer. So it's really a difficult matter, but it is I think it's a pity because it's a big economic power, but it has the influence in international affairs is not as high as it should be.
However, moving on, we could consider briefly Northern Ireland in relation to the previously mentioned matter. We were looking in details the report of the EU and the UK in what they argue is the last agreement, to a certain extent a success. To a certain extent, we are going to start looking in the media that there are problems in the UK with what is at stake right now. In the meantime, the issue with Northern Ireland or the Good Friday Agreement refer to perhaps one of the most successful moments in the UK history, at least in the last 3 or 4 decades of the UK political history. The issue with the troubles and the violence in Northern Ireland put the UK status quo under a lot of pressure in several fronts at the domestic level because of the escalation of violence in Northern Ireland, and at the international level because they could not use more coercive force, even though that they systematically violated human rights in Northern Ireland. They could have been worse, but due to international observers, they actually did not develop their rage as they could have done. That's to put it clear. In the meantime, we are looking at a context of people extremely emotional and devoted. Northern Ireland, particularly in the time of the RIA, became an inspirational force or an inspirational movement of resistance in Latin America. If you look at the Basque Country and ETA, where those kind of rebel groups were looking steadily Northern Ireland. The training in Northern Ireland was impressive. They became very well known for their techniques. During the Blair government, they reached the condition of negotiation. As you can see in the slide, you have the links to access the original reports. The first one is from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission in 2013, one report from 2012 that is from the Northern Ireland Peace Report, and EU Regional Policy Info. Key points to notice is that while Catalonia is considered a nation-state matter in the way that the Spanish state decided to behave, it would be very difficult to dismiss that it was a systematic violation of human rights what the Catalonian people experienced during the last referendum. Yet the EU was silent about it, that it is considered by default complicity, minimizing also the meaning of the EU. Before the Catalonian problem, we see that there is a lot of intervention by the EU in relation to the Good Friday Agreement. Actually, 80% of the funding is from the EU, the rest, to a larger or minor extent, is funded by the UK government. The total budget available for funding this project is estimated in 740 million euros. Therefore, the peace process in Northern Ireland requires a massive input of cash, to say something. I've been in Northern Ireland a few times. It takes no time to realize that, however defining the context of Northern Ireland, it would be sincerely wrong to think that the social context in Northern Ireland is somehow resolved. And it's going to be very unlucky that they are going to resolve it now. The conflict between Northern Ireland, the UK status quo. In fact, as much as you can read in relation to how much money the UK, the EU have invested in Northern Ireland, when you look closely, there is not any advances in reconciliation. But that is more a matter of transitional justice. That issue of reconciliation has been overlooked. In fact, there is no study corroborating that reconciliation in transitional justice actually works. That is a particular area of my PhD. As far as I checked, no report of the United Nations or any other institution working in the area of transitional justice has ever published empirical evidence that could correlate reconciliation with transitional justice or even peace advances. We do have a request, as you can see in any of the reports, particularly when you're looking at Northern Ireland, that there is an external request for reconciliation that in reality is totally unrelated to the locals. If you happen to visit Northern Ireland, just a short walk in the urban development is going to show you straight on that there is no such thing as advance in the development of the, at least in Belfast. The issue in the countryside is arguably different, but I'm still looking at the social indicators in Belfast, and you can observe several irregularities there. To point that actually the context has been resolved is to dismiss not only the historical development of Northern Ireland, but also its current political reality, the current political crisis, the over quotation of the context that in relation to the DUP only shows the dismissal of the rest of the political parties also active in Northern Ireland. No? In fact, there is a current political crisis there. When we look at Northern Ireland, we start considering if in reality such financial investment had led to any factual advances. We can say that there is a relationship between funding and the lack of violent development. We know that there is not as such violence in Northern Ireland, but it's very closely looked to by the UK's army. No? A lot of sources from the UK intelligence invested in Northern Ireland. We pointed before a few areas related to Northern Ireland at glance. And I gave you some links with sources if you are interested in looking that forward, maybe looking at that area in details for policy studies, policy analysis. And we were slowly scattering some tensions regarding Brexit and what this latest report that argues that there is an agreement reached by the UK and the EU with regarding Brexit and what is going to happen, and give you some brief visual data regarding the empirical nature of the report. What I would share, if you let me, are three short views. The first one is about the experiences of a former British soldier. He is English, but he was working in Northern Ireland during the peak of violence. I was lucky enough to have interviewed not only him, but a few people more. Remember that when we quote interviews, it does not mean that it is a qualitative data analysis, no? It's just a snap quotation, just to give you some introduction. It would not make sense to give you maybe a poll of interviews done because it's just for descriptive purposes. So since it is going to be just for a description, then it may be valid a quotation, but if you are going to use that, then you may need maybe more interviews and do a proper qualitative data analysis. No? The second point that I'm going to share is insights from a survivor of the Pinochet camp. That is going to be a little sum up of my conversations with her. That is not recorded, and that's just a short view. And the third point is what happened during the last snap British general elections call, because I happened to be in Northern Ireland that night. The next recording refers to an interview that I did to a former British military. He was working in Northern Ireland during the travel. Just very, very brief quotations from him, and then I'm going to move on. You were working in the army. In what year was it?
Oh, this
Years,
would have been around about Late 70s, early 80s.
So and when you were working in that area, how long did you work in Northern Ireland, or roughly that area? Or how long did you know that?
That would have been about a year or so.
A year. Do you remember in what year was it?
No, not without sort of going back and checking exactly.
All right. Was it before 80s?
Yes, it would have been, yeah. Just before, maybe sort of 78, 79, something like that.
And in what part of Belfast did you work? Of Belfast, of Northern Ireland? Was it Belfast? Was it in the south?
It would have been in the main sort of area, which is Belfast.
Belfast. Now it's beautiful. What are the things that you remember as violent? If somebody says a violent context, what would you remember as the peak of violence for your experience?
It's the bombings, basically.
Bombings. There in Belfast?
Yeah, and also throughout the UK as well, predominantly London. There was the Brighton bomb and so on. But you've also got the sort of the overall control that both factions had over the general public. So you've got like the punishment, beatings, and so on and so forth.
So two factions controlling the public.
Mm-hmm.
And what factions were those?
The IRA and the Loyalists.
Loyalists. By loyalists is the unionist.
Yes, yeah, the Unionists, yeah.
When we say loyalists and unionists, is it the same, or they are two different fractions?
You've got the UDA, which is the Ulster Defence Association, the UDR, which is the Ulster Defence Regiment, and they were sort of loyalists. They were loyal to the monarchy and so on. And then you've got the other side, which is the Provisionals, and the IRA, which were anti-establishment and wanted the independence.
But within the loyalists, there were a few
There's
groups.
2 or 3 different factions. Yeah. I mean, even the IRA has a couple of branches. They've got what they call the real IRA now.
That would be the more violent.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what people say at that time? What locals say?
They kind of didn't have a great deal of choice. They would have had to sort of live with it. You wouldn't necessarily have known who all the people were. It's a bit like if you go to a similar, if you sort of taking that sort of context and then applying that to Chicago in the 1930s, you had the gangsters like Al Capone, and then in London in the 60s you had the Krays and the Richardsons. They had their own little enclave, so that generally the public, there was very little crime carried out in those areas because you're liable to get sort of stabbed or very badly cut. And if you went into someone else's area and tried sort of doing a robbery or maybe mugging somebody, you could end up potentially dead. So there's an element of that level of control. So that you've got 2 sides of the coin. The public are relatively secure in their neighbourhood because they've got that overall protection from outsiders coming in to do any mischief, shall we say. But they've also, then there's an overlying fear that also creates. So they're kind of stuck between 2 places.
For you, what was the experience that you remember that was a fear experience?
There was a general, you've got to be wary wherever you go, because you just don't know. I mean, everybody was looking underneath their cars before they got in them. Cars, military vehicles, things. Everybody was in safe compounds. It was the local sort of police force that were more exposed than most. And then you've got the sort of improvised explosive devices, the ambushes.
Ambushes is when you are in one place and then you are surrounded by.
Basically, yeah.
Was it urban practice that one, or more countryside?
More countryside because it's easier to conceal in the countryside where the arms caches and things were. So you couldn't relax. You were constantly sort of alert as to what was going on. Yeah.
From your experience, do you think that the measures taken to deal with the conflict were helping or making things worse?
It depends on which side of the fence you're standing as to whether they were sort of better or not. To get the transition from that, there was a process carried out in Italy in a similar sort of period in the 70s, which is what they class as the golden era of terrorism, where it was, I can't remember the name, there's an Italian word for it, and it's basically the Red Brigade. So what you have to do is you have to offer the people that are there an alternative to the terrorism that they're involved in and pull them away from that and give them an alternative and give them a message. You also then have to look at the people that are going to come up from below, and they see these terrorists, and they probably know who they are to some degree, so they might look up to them because they have an element of power and they have an element of sort of control over society. So if you're on the fringes of society, maybe from a poor area, poor neighbourhood and so on, it gives you something to aspire to, because you can, similar to the mafia as well, you can see these people driving around in big flash cars and so on. So you have an aspiration, you can see that from where they came from, you did the same. The chances of you becoming, say, an international banker are very, very limited because you don't have the education. Whereas you could become a criminal, and you could sort of become quite a wealthy criminal. So, so what you have to do is intercept that message and try and pull the people away from that and give them an alternative, which is what the system in Italy did. And they basically starved the Red Brigade of new recruits. And if you look then at the transition with the government in Northern Ireland, if you take Martin McGuinness as an example, he was a prominent member of the IRA, but he was then given an alternative, which was to be a member of the government. So by giving him that opportunity, it had at least two sort of lines of sort of thought. You take him out of that, he's very prominent, he then renounces to some degree the violence, and he actually gains more by being a member of the government. He can do more.
This is more or less the initial part of the interview that lasted more than an hour with the former British soldier that now is a civilian. Very important is the interception of the message by the British government, and then if you ask a direct question, and that is coming up as a pattern in other interviews, it always depends of where you are standing and in what side are you. The concern now with the current management of the crisis, either by the EU or the UK with regards the Northern Ireland context, is that the message doesn't come across very clearly. On the one hand, it looks like the EU is assuming that it's likely to be violent against Northern Ireland for historical reasons, but also that they stigmatizes a little bit Northern Ireland, minimizes the overall historical context. And on the other hand, we have the UK that is aware of the problem and is siding again with the DUP, and again, by default, maybe building the context of chance of violence again for political reasons perhaps, or not. That would be just an hypothesis isolated. If I were to correlate what the last participant mentioned with the female survivor of the Pinochet camps in Chile, Pinochet was the former dictator of Chile since 1973. My participant was detained in a Pinochet camp in Pisagüe for about 7 months. She survived torture and the extreme condition of typical detention, illegal detention camp in Latin America. You have a pattern of violence with that. I've been working with her about 3 years or more. And it came across once that she was detained in Pinochet camp, but also when she arrived to the UK, she was actually a political activist. And one of the few things that she pointed is the main problem there was, first of all, a social class division due to economical reasons. And another issue that escalated the situation worse was the presence of the British Army, because they considered that it was an invasion. And when you sum up a little bit, and then you start talking with the locals, the situation is exactly as the participants pointed. The accuracy in both sides is quite in detail. And I was in Belfast that night that we had the general election in the UK. It was very hilarious because I arrived one day before the general election. People were talking about it, but a little bit indifferent. All the polls were pointing that the Conservative will literally win according to the market and social research. And as I pointed earlier, you cannot trust those institutions, first because I worked in them a year and a half in the UK, and I experienced how they bias the data gathering, and that it doesn't have any meaning in social research. If you want to do social research, then you really cannot trust those institutions to gather the data, of course. I went to talk to the locals, and the night before they were saying that any association with the DUP would by default put at risk the Good Friday Agreement. And the next morning I went to interview people, some academics, and then I went to move around and walk a little bit in the field. And somebody told me the worst thing that could happen, even though the May won, albeit that the Conservative lost seats, is that they could look now at the DUP. And that was early in the morning. An hour and a half after that, I was having a coffee and I looked at the news, and I couldn't believe that actually Theresa May was looking the ways to negotiate with the DUP. So Conservatives went down, the problem of Brexit and the discord with Brexit didn't work. And when you look at political history, then we are having a situation where the last resort of the Conservative was to actually jeopardize their own domestic stability. On that ground, then you are looking at the problem that is showing to what extent the UK needed to look after all its sources, political sources, in order to face the current Brexit. By default, Brexit meant for British politicians a complete catastrophe. It was very humiliating for the Conservative to look for the help of the DUP for supporting the policies and their Brexit approach. The final part that we are gonna briefly look at, just to sum up what we were talking so far to this point, is linked to the current political context. It is not possible to separate decision making at the policy level from historical and regional developments. A good example has been the UK snap election. There we can see a certain karma, to say something, because the Conservative Party overused the Brexit discourse, and that did not go very well with voters. And if you happen to visit the UK for whatever reason, you can ask locals about Brexit, and you are gonna find very quickly that people are very fed up. They don't really want to hear anything further, and there is not a day that you can actually look for the news, at least the official news, and try to find something that is not related to Brexit. Usually they are front pages of tabloid papers, so if you look at the BBC website or the Guardian website, the Brexit is all around. The reality of Brexit in the EU, as far as I am aware, it played a role of about 30 minutes per week. That it was as far as the EU decided to discuss the Brexit issue. However, in the UK it's about Brexit. And if you ask me what is the meaning of that, it tends to cover many problems, particularly many social concerns. In the case of the UK, you have a total lack of control about working securities. We are in a constant return to 0 working hours. The very idea of Theresa May just feeling what she promised to the EU is under dispute heavily, because the Brexit campaign has been built upon lies, one lie after the other one and after the other one, a very cheap way of demonizing the other, particularly in this case EU citizens. Therefore, we can see that in the snap elections, the effect of the mood of the voters. To a certain extent, the snap election did affect the SNP in the way that lost 19 seats, but remains the majority in the Scottish Parliament. And that idea that they are the majority is not as important as actually losing seats. So you will see that the media, usually the dominant media, will use a lot that. They don't say that this is the dominant party; they say actually they lost power. Interestingly, in the last UK snap election, the Scotland SNP did not use the idea of the second referendum. The main group using the second referendum was the Conservative in Scotland, actually. Northern Ireland gained at the moment historical influence, though to me it seems transitional until the negotiations with the EU are resolved. I would be very surprised if Northern Ireland would play any role after this, and there are no securities that the Theresa May government will actually give the money and benefit that promised to the DUP. If you look at the facility to lie and actually to quickly move on and ignore what they promised to Northern Ireland, Scotland, and all the rest, it's going to be very unlikely that the Theresa May government would actually feel any agreement with the EU, with the Scotland or else. So it looks like the British state is facing an implosion and they are not even accepting it. The Brexit impact and the UK after the EU shows that the level of crisis is unmanageable, literally. They have not the capability, the skills, not the interest of actually resolving. It looks like they happen to be in that cloud of empire. Therefore, it's very unlikely that they are going to find any solution at any time soon. The issue with Catalonia played a very complicated context. It played a very difficult game for the SNP because we were all looking at Catalonia from here. And but the very fact that the Spanish state decided to send the Guardia Civil to close the chances of people to actually vote. We are not talking about declaring independence as they did thereafter, or we are not talking about something violent like ETA. We are looking at just people going to vote, and that changed the game. Then you can see, if you search for it, the discourses of people that were actually very well known for building xenophobic or pretty much racist arguments against EU, such as Farage from the UKIP, actually using that weakness of the EU regarding Catalonia. Catalonia played the game in the way that whatever you thought was the EU, it is no longer the case. And that is very problematic because now we can see that the idea of having a context where human rights would be protected is actually no factor. The issue with Catalonia is quite severe because in theory we have an issue of the rule of law, but by default Catalonia fits the criteria for an independent state. Actually, the voting was towards independence. We don't see that the Spanish state was extremely coercive. It did humiliate the country, but we don't see casualties, death. So it pushed the violence to the extreme, but it did not cross the line. In that ground, we can argue that it was constitutionally right, but to argue that is to dismiss the very nature of voting a referendum of independence that would override any constitution, and that is international law. Therefore, what we are looking at is a different context of international relations, a different context of how relations are dealing with unions. Unions are no longer representative and actually are coercive, and that message is being used by the Conservative Party in the UK against the EU, and by default Scotland is using the arguments that the British government is using against the EU, but against the continuation of the British Union. So posture of the SNP is that whatever the Conservatives say against the EU is applicable in favor of Scotland. That's pretty much the context. If you're gonna look at certain point Northern Ireland from the policy making or counter-terrorist policies, it's a key case study. In fact, most scholars would agree that if you want to understand the policy making of counter-terrorism at the European level, you really need to look at the Basque Country, you really need to look at Northern Ireland. Those are the basics to learn how the counter-terrorist measures were worked out, what really works, what actually doesn't, and how can we move forward. What is a fact is that violence to a certain extent in Northern Ireland worked because before the IRA the context was absolutely a mess and absolutely imbalanced. The Catholic communities were absolutely exposed, and it wasn't until the IRA that actually they had something institutionally, perhaps illegal, that actually protected people, fought for a better context for locals. And in that case, in that ground, IRA succeeded. To deny that and the pragmatic and creative use of violence would be to dismiss the fact of Northern Ireland. It's a region that problematized the UK, is the Achilles weakness of the UK status quo, and I think the EU is using that very well. It is using Northern Ireland shamefully very well, because I think to use the context of Northern Ireland to force any political negotiation is as bad as to use citizens. Those kind of things should be secured by both parties without even mentioning, for the politic memory of Northern Ireland and also for the rights that European citizens have in both sides, in the UK and Europe. So if something, this arrangement is showing the real faces of both, and almost directional toward the genocidal policies of the UK, because they are not yet escalating, but I don't see a way that this is going to end well at all if you are European living in the UK. On the other hand, how the EU is using a very small regions to try to lecture the UK about anything, particularly even after the Catalonian indifference, and saying the legitimacy of the EU imploded in the UK to historical levels, because by showing indifference about the systematic violation of human rights in Catalonia, by default one started questioning in the other side, for example in Northern Ireland or in Scotland, these kind of two places that supported overwhelmingly the idea of staying in the EU. But after Catalonia, then we start thinking, okay, are they going to support it? And supporting the EU, what would be the benefit? Because as far as Catalonia, the Catalonian case shows, the Catalonian citizens were ambushed by a perverse nation state, almost with the Francoist methods, humiliating European citizens, beating children, and you look at it and you think, how come that happens in the EU? So the nation state did not protect Catalonian citizens, actually the nation state betraying them. Then you have another violation by the EU that's supposed to protect EU citizens. Now, if you look closely, if you try to be critical, then you think, okay, on the one hand, the EU has been very active, participating in the Good Friday Agreement. On the other hand, you have a European Union very permissive when it comes to the violation of human rights for as long as you stay with us. So, but if you are not staying with us, the EU, then you need to look after human rights. You need to protect your citizens. But if you are not with us, that's going to be your way. We need to protect our citizens, because if you are with us, well, in reality, we cannot protect our citizens neither. And the Catalonia case is one example. In conclusion, overall, the cases of Brexit, the EU, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Catalonia refer to different historical, social, political tensions. Overreaching unions, such as the EU and the UK, share a pattern of a lack of regional values and identity that sharply contrast macro-political structures. Northern Ireland shifted from the level of unwanted province, a place that the UK didn't want to deal with historically during the travels particularly. It also showed that even the Republic of Ireland didn't want to deal with that because they didn't want to have to face a civil war in a context. Therefore, if we start considering the Catalonian problematic and the lack of solution by the EU to protect Catalonian citizens and the fact that Catalonian citizens were cornered by the Spanish state in what looks a very recent systematic violation of human rights, we can assert that we cannot really trust either to protect Catalonian human rights. That problematic also affected Scotland because Scotland was playing heavily the card of remaining with the EU, but after Catalonia we have a side effect in Scotland, and actually now the issue is it worth to actually join the EU or follow that direction at the political level. There are several areas that, of course, due to the timing limits and due to the complexity of the cases, I could not develop further. I did manage to share some interviews and some insights. However, if you have any further question, do send me an email and I'm happy to help you out if I can. We can conclude that while Scotland independence movements focus on the economic importance of the EU, Catalonia is mainly an emotional context. I've been there and I don't remember to have heard heavily the issue of economic problems. We know that for the Spain government it's very important to keep holding on Catalonia for its GDP, but for Catalans, as far as I experienced the context, economic issues were not very relevant. It was mainly emotional. That may explain why in Scotland you don't have 100,000 of people marching in favor of the referendum or the second Scottish referendum. I think in the last march that I was, there were about 9,500 people, but the official media has put it down between 5,000 or 6,000. Usually BBC could minimize the attendance of the marches. If you consider the total population of Scotland, 5,200,000 people overall, then 9,000 people is not a bad number, but still is a little bit low, I would say. If I'm thinking now in Argentina or in Spain or even in any other country, perhaps a march would call several thousand of people, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people, like without much effort. Whereas in Scotland, just to build the 9,000 people marching was a massive effort. Finally, there are a few questions there, 3 questions that you may be interested in looking at. And I left the links for the reports that I was looking at, some of the reports that I was looking at in the debates before. Perhaps if you would like to have a look to the questions and let me know what your thoughts or insights are about it, then it would be great. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you have a very nice week. Thank you.